The rain was coming down in sheets, the kind of thick, heavy drops that beat a rhythm on the roof of my truck and turned the whole world into a gray watercolor painting. It was late October, and the woods around my small patch of land were giving up their last bits of color. All I wanted was a hot coffee and the kind of silence you can only find 20 miles from the nearest highway. After a week of mapping groundwater for a county project, my bones ached for it. I turned onto my gravel driveway, and my headlights cut through the downpour, landing on the new cedar gate I'd just finished installing a month ago, and on the flash of unnatural, garish orange stapled right to the wood. You know that feeling? When something is so obviously out of place it makes the air go still? I killed the engine and just sat there for a second, listening to the drumming on the roof. Some part of me hoped it was a flyer for a pizza place that had seriously lost its way. But I knew better. This happened to me. And if you're watching Karenology, you know, it's never just a misunderstanding. I pushed the truck door open into the wet air. The smell of damp pine needles and ozone hit me instantly. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked to the gate. The orange paper was already soaked, the ink starting to bleed. In big, bold letters it said, "Final warning and penalty assessment." Below that, a figure that made my stomach clench, $500. I didn't even have time to process it. A set of blindingly bright headlights swung into my driveway, pinning me against my own gate like an animal caught on the road. The engine was a low, arrogant rumble. It was a brand new, oversized SUV, the kind that had never seen a speck of mud. Behind the wheel, I could just make out the silhouette of Karen, the self-appointed queen of our little homeowners association. I ripped the paper off the gate, the staples tearing at the new wood. The soggy pulp felt like a dead thing in my hand. "What is this, Karen?" I called out, my voice tight. The driver's side window purred down. She leaned out, a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. She was in her late 40s, hair perfectly coiffed even in this downpour, wrapped in a jacket that probably cost more than my gate. "That," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "is the fee for an unauthorized driveway obstruction, as per Section C, Paragraph 4 of the community bylaws." I held up the ruined paper. "This is a $500 fine for a gate on my own property." "It's a daily fee, Leo," she corrected, and that's when I saw the glint of real pleasure in her eyes. "And it will continue to be assessed every day the obstruction remains." Let me tell you, something inside me just went cold. I've dealt with difficult people my whole life. As a hydrogeologist, you argue with developers, you clash with bureaucrats, you tell people things they don't want to hear about the ground beneath their feet. But this was different. This was personal. Have you ever felt that? Like you're being targeted not for what you did, but for who you are. If this is hitting close to home for you, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps to know you're not alone. Her headlights caught the glint of something on my belt, my old brass compass. It was my father's. He was a surveyor, and he taught me how to read the land long before I ever opened a textbook. It's a tool, but it's also a symbol, a reminder to trust what the earth tells you, not what people want you to believe. "This is private property, Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The permit for the guest cabin included this access road." She laughed, a short, sharp sound that was swallowed by the rain. "The permit was for the cabin, Leo, not the gate. You see, the bylaws you signed, the ones you probably didn't read, they guarantee every homeowner an unobstructed view of the natural landscape, and your gate, charming as it is, obstructs that view." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "An unobstructed view? From where? Your house is half a mile away, through a forest." "The rules are the rules," she chirped, her smile widening. She put the SUV in reverse. "Payment is due within 72 hours. Have a lovely evening." The engine revved, and the white SUV backed out onto the road, its red taillights disappearing into the gloom. I was left standing in the pouring rain, alone, with a soggy piece of paper in my hand. The ink was a blue smear, but the number was burned into my mind, $500, and the sun had already set on day one. I was left standing in the pouring rain, alone, with a soggy piece of paper in my hand. The ink was a blue smear, but the number was burned into my mind, $500, and the sun had already set on day one. 2 days later, the fine was up to $1,500, and I was sitting in what our homeowners association called a clubhouse. Let me paint you a picture. It's a single-wide trailer they plopped down by the lake 10 years ago. It smells faintly of mildew and forgotten potlucks. The lighting is the kind of flickering fluorescent glare that makes everyone look sick, and the whole place is filled with cheap stackable plastic chairs. Every time someone shifted their weight, the chairs would let out a pained squeak. It was the sound of bureaucratic misery. The emergency meeting consisted of me, Karen, her two cronies from the board, a guy named Henderson who always looked like he'd just smelled something bad, and a woman who never spoke, and about 5 other neighbors who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I was calm. I was prepared. I had my original county-stamped permit, smoothed out and protected in a plastic sleeve. I waited for Karen to finish her little speech about community harmony and protecting our shared aesthetic. Then, I placed the document on the folding table between us. "Karen, board members," I started, keeping my voice level. "Here's the permit for the guest house. As you can see, it includes the plot plan, which clearly marks the access road and the gate as part of the approved structure. It was all inspected and signed off on by the county." Karen didn't even look at it. She just steepled her fingers, her nails a perfect blood-red manicure. "That's very interesting, Leo. But as we've discussed, your permit is for a residential structure. A gate," she said, drawing the word out as if it were something exotic, "is a boundary fixture. It falls under a different set of covenants, specifically Section C, which you violated." I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. "That's semantics. It's the same piece of land. The gate is necessary for the security of the cabin." Henderson, her loyal bulldog, finally spoke up, his voice a reedy whine. "But it blocks the view. The bylaws are very clear about preserving the natural sightlines." "Oh, what sightline?" I shot back, my patience fraying. "It's 100 yards of dense forest between here and my gate. Nobody can see it unless they're trespassing on my property." That's when I saw the trap. Her eyes lit up. "So you admit you're blocking access," she said smoothly. "No, I'm securing my property." It was no use. You ever try to reason with a brick wall? At least a brick wall is quiet. This was worse. This was a wall that smiled while it crushed you. "A motion is on the table to uphold the fines and to require Mr. Maxwell to remove the unapproved structure immediately," Karen announced, her voice ringing with finality. "All in favor?" 3 hands went up instantly, hers, Henderson's, and the silent woman's. The other neighbors stared at their laps, refusing to meet my eyes. "The motion passes," she declared. Her smile was a weapon. "The daily fine stands, Leo. As of today, your balance is $1,500. And something inside me just snapped. It wasn't a thought, it was a physical reaction. All the frustration, the injustice, the sheer maddening absurdity of it all boiled over. My hand, clenched into a fist on my lap, came down hard on the table. The crack echoed in the small room like a gunshot. The plastic table buckled. A cup of water wobbled and fell, spilling across the floor. Silence. I looked up. Every single person was staring at me, and not with understanding, not with sympathy. They looked at me with fear, with alarm. I wasn't the reasonable man defending his home anymore. In that single stupid moment, I had become exactly who Karen wanted them to see. The angry, unstable old guy. The loose cannon who couldn't control his temper. I had just handed her the perfect weapon to use against me. I pushed my chair back, the legs screaming against the linoleum, and walked out without another word. The heavy door of the trailer clicked shut behind me, and the sound felt like a lock turning on a cage. I was on the outside now, and the night had never felt so cold. The heavy door of the trailer clicked shut behind me, and the sound felt like a lock turning on a cage. I was on the outside now, and the night had never felt so cold. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in social strangulation. I've always been a private person. I like my work, I like my woods, and I keep to myself. But in a small community like ours, privacy is an illusion. Your reputation is currency, and mine had just gone bankrupt. It started online. I'm a consultant. My living depends on my name, on the trust people have in my expertise as a hydrogeologist. I logged on to my professional website the next morning to check on a proposal, and my heart sank into my boots. A dozen new reviews had appeared overnight. They were all 1-star. Unstable and aggressive. Do not hire, prone to violent outbursts. This man has a serious anger problem, unprofessional. The words were almost identical, a coordinated attack. I knew exactly where they came from. It was Karen's digital lynch mob, but knowing it and proving it were two different things. It was my word against a dozen anonymous accounts. What would you do in that situation? When your good name, the one you've spent a lifetime building, gets dragged through the mud? Later that day, I got a call from a developer I was supposed to sign a $10,000 contract with. He was apologetic, but firm. "Leo, I'm sorry," he said, his voice hesitant. "We saw some concerning feedback online. We've decided to go in a different direction." $10,000, gone, just like that. That was more than just money. It was my mortgage payment, my property taxes. It was the cost of Karen's war. But the real gut punch came in person. The social freeze was immediate. The wave you get from a neighbor driving by, gone. The friendly nod from the guy at the local hardware store, replaced with a stare that quickly darted away. I was being erased. I walked into the small diner in town, the one where everybody knows your name and how you like your coffee. As I stepped through the door, the low hum of conversation just stopped. It was like a movie. Heads turned, then quickly turned away. A few people got up and left. The air grew thick and heavy with unspoken judgment. I felt like I had a disease. I slid onto a stool at the counter, my usual spot. Maria, the owner, who had been refilling my coffee cup for 15 years, busied herself wiping down a perfectly clean counter, her back to me. The silence was deafening. It was worse than yelling, worse than accusations. It was the sound of being completely and utterly alone. I was no longer Leo Maxwell, the guy who could tell you where to dig a well. I was the monster from the Homeowners Association meeting, the angry old man who smashed tables. Karen hadn't just fined me, she'd painted a target on my back. She'd turned my neighbors into a silent jury, and they had already found me guilty. I sat there for what felt like an hour, staring at my reflection in the polished chrome of the napkin dispenser. The man looking back at me looked tired, defeated. I finally slid off the stool, dropped a $5 bill on the counter for a coffee I never got, and walked out. As I pushed the door open, a cold gust of wind hit me. It smelled like rain again. I stood on the sidewalk, the neon diner sign casting a lonely red glow on the wet pavement. I was isolated, professionally damaged, socially exiled, and the fines were still ticking up, now over $2,000. For the first time, I felt a genuine flicker of fear. This wasn't a fight I could win with logic or permits. This was a war of whispers, and I was losing badly. And the worst part, I didn't have a clue what to do next. There's only one person you call when you're out of conventional options. His name is Arthur. He's a retired surveyor, pushing 80, and knows every rock, tree, and dirty little secret in this county. He lives in a cluttered cabin filled with old maps and the smell of stale pipe tobacco and weak coffee. Arthur is, to put it mildly, a pain in the neck. He's cantankerous, rude, and has the social graces of a cornered badger, but his mind is a steel trap. I found him on his porch, whittling a piece of wood. He didn't look up as I approached, just kept shaving off perfect thin curls of pine. "Let me guess," he grunted without preamble. "Karen." I sat on the porch step, the old wood groaning under my weight. "She's got me boxed in, Arthur. Permits, bylaws, she's twisting everything. Now she's torching my reputation." He finally looked at me, his eyes a pale, watery blue, but sharp as glass. "Of course she is. That's how she operates. You're playing chess. She's knocking over the board and claiming she won." He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "You're looking in the wrong place. Her rules are a distraction. The truth is in the land. Always is." He gave me a simple, frustrating piece of advice. Go to the county archive. Pull the original plat maps. From before the developer broke ground here, before the Homeowners Association even existed. It felt like a long shot, a desperate hunt for a clerical error from half a century ago, but I was out of ideas. The next morning, I drove down to the county records office, a place that smelled of dust and decaying paper. Behind the counter was a young woman, an intern by the name of Maya. She was bright, eager, and probably the only person in the building who knew how their new digital system worked. I told her what I was looking for. She tapped away at her keyboard, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Okay, Maxwell parcel, subdivision plans, here we go." She spun the monitor around. "We have the developer's plans from the 90s and then..." Oh, this is interesting. We have a digitized survey map from 1972. She pulled it up on the screen. It was an old hand-drawn map, beautifully detailed. I leaned in, my heart starting to pound a little faster. And then I saw it. A thin, dotted line. It cut right across my property, right where I'd built my guest house. And the words next to it made the air leave my lungs. Public easement. It's a legal term. It means a right-of-way. It meant that a slice of my land wasn't entirely mine. It meant that legally the public had the right to pass through it. It meant my gate was technically blocking a public thoroughfare. It meant Karen was right. I felt dizzy. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. All this time, I'd been so sure I was in the right, so sure this was a clear case of a power-mad woman on a vendetta. But the land, the one thing I trusted, was telling me I was wrong. The proof was right there, in faded ink on a 50-year-old map. Maya, seeing the look on my face, tried to be helpful. Easements can be tricky, she offered gently. Sometimes they get extinguished or abandoned over time, but the damage was done. This wasn't a smoking gun against Karen. It was a smoking gun against me. I had built on land I didn't have the full right to control. Arthur's advice had led me straight into a dead end. Worse than a dead end, it had led me to a truth that could destroy my entire case. I thanked Maya, my voice hollow, and walked out of the archive into the blinding afternoon sun. The hope that had flickered inside me was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. I had just found the nail for my own coffin. Now I just had to wait for Karen to hammer it in. It didn't take long. How she found out, I'll never know. Maybe she had a spy in the records office. Maybe she was just smart enough to look in the same place I did. All I know is that less than 24 hours later, a screenshot of that 1972 map appeared in the neighborhood's private social media group. The post was pure Karen, triumphant yet feigning concern. It has come to my attention that the unapproved structure was built on a public easement. This is a serious legal issue, far beyond a simple bylaw violation. Our community could be liable. The comments exploded. People who had been silent were suddenly outraged. He built on public land? This is completely unacceptable. Sue him. My phone started buzzing with notifications. My email pinged with a new, official-looking letter from the Homeowners Association's lawyer, citing state statutes and threatening legal action. The fines, which had now surpassed $5,000, were the least of my worries. This was escalating into a full-blown legal war, one I couldn't afford to fight, and one that, according to the evidence, I was destined to lose. It was my moment of total defeat. You ever been there? When you fought as hard as you can, and you realize every move you've made has only made things worse. The walls were closing in, and I was trapped. That same afternoon, another white truck pulled into my driveway. Not Karen's luxury SUV, but a county vehicle. A man from the health department stepped out, clipboard in hand. He said they'd received an anonymous complaint about a possible septic system failure on my property, another of Karen's little love notes. He wanted to inspect my leach field, which would mean digging up half my yard. I was standing there, arguing with the health inspector, when Frank drove past. Frank owns the local hardware store. He's a quiet man, a fixture in town. He slowed his truck, gave me a long, considering look, then drove on. I felt a fresh wave of shame. Even Frank, a man who had sold me every nut and bolt for that guest cabin, now probably thought I was some kind of outlaw. The health inspector finally left, promising to be back with a team. I walked back into my house, the silence inside roaring in my ears. I felt old, tired. I sank into my armchair, the one my wife had loved, and just stared out the window at the woods. Maybe it was time to give up, take down the gate, pay the fines, sell the place, and just leave, let her win. Just as that thought crossed my mind, my phone rang. It was Frank from the hardware store. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Leo," he said, "I'm not one to meddle, but I was just over at Karen's place this morning, dropping off some fertilizer for her prize-winning roses, and she was complaining up a storm." I didn't say anything. I was too tired to care about Karen's gardening problems. "She was complaining," Frank went on, "about the swamp behind her rose bushes. Said the ground's been soggy for months, ever since she had all that new landscaping done last spring. Said it's ruining her blooms." I was about to thank him and hang up, but then the words registered. Swamp, soggy ground, new landscaping. An image flashed in my mind, not of maps or bylaws, but of water. Water moving under the ground, unseen. Water that doesn't care about property lines or public easements. I'm a hydrogeologist. It's what I do. I read the story that water tells. And in that moment, a new story began to form. A wild, improbable idea. A story that had nothing to do with a gate or a view. Frank's words were a stray spark in the darkness. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't despair. It was the thrill of the hunt. I looked out the window again, not at the trees, but at the ground beneath them. "Frank," I said, my voice hoarse, "thank you." The game had just changed. I was done playing defense. I was done playing by Karen's rules. It was time to write some of my own. That night, the rain returned. It wasn't a storm, just a steady, relentless drizzle that soaked the earth. It was perfect. I waited until well after midnight, when the only lights in the neighborhood were the lonely street lamps casting long, distorted shadows. I pulled on my old work boots and a dark raincoat, feeling like a spy in my own life. In my workshop, under the bare bulb, I grabbed what I needed. It wasn't a weapon. It was a tool of my trade, a 5-gallon container of non-toxic, biodegradable fluorescent tracer dye. The stuff is harmless, but under the right conditions, it glows an eerie, supernatural green. Geologists use it to track the flow of underground water. Tonight, I was going to use it to uncover a secret. I walked the perimeter of my property, the wet leaves muffling my footsteps. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and decay. I found the spot I was looking for, a small, almost invisible drainage culvert near the road, half hidden by overgrown ferns. It was the highest point of the natural water runoff on my land. Here's the thing about water. It always seeks the path of least resistance. It flows downhill, following the contours of the land, both on the surface and beneath it. My property sat slightly uphill from most of the others in the subdivision, including Karen's. I unscrewed the cap on the container. The quiet click sounded like a thunderclap in the dead of night. I poured the entire 5 gallons of bright yellow liquid into the culvert. It vanished into the darkness with a greedy gurgle, swallowed by the earth. Now, all I had to do was wait for the land to tell its story. The next 2 days were nerve-wracking. The fine notifications kept coming. My bank account was bleeding. But for the first time, I felt like I had a purpose beyond just reacting. I was running my own investigation. I called Arthur, the old surveyor. I told him my theory. For the first time, I heard a hint of respect in his gravelly voice. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "You might be onto something, son. If her new retaining walls and fancy French drains change the subsurface flow, that's not just a bylaw violation. That's a major environmental issue." He agreed to be my expert witness, if it came to that. The next piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Henderson, Karen's sniveling sidekick on the board, called me. He sounded nervous, panicked even. "Leo," he stammered. Karen is calling another meeting, a big one. She's invited a developer." My blood ran cold. "What kind of developer?" "He's interested in buying up some of the problematic lots for a new luxury development. She's using your easement issue as the justification to declare your land and a few others as unstable and ripe for redevelopment." It all clicked into place. The gate was never the issue. My reputation wasn't the issue. The easement was just the excuse. This was a land grab. Karen and Henderson, and probably others, were trying to devalue our properties so they could sell them cheap to a friendly developer, likely for a handsome kickback. The soggy ground on their own properties wasn't a problem. It was a symptom of the very changes they had made to manipulate the water table. They had sabotaged the land to justify their scheme. The final piece of my plan was to get everyone in one place. Karen's community meeting was the perfect stage. It was scheduled to be held on the manicured lawn right next to her precious rose garden, her home turf. She thought she was about to deliver the killing blow. She had no idea she was walking right into my trap. That evening, just before sunset, I took a walk. I stayed off the road, moving through the woods that bordered the back of Karen's property. I carried a powerful blacklight flashlight in my hand. I approached her prize-winning rose bushes, the ones Frank had told me about. The ground was just as he'd said, spongy and wet. I knelt down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I switched on the blacklight and pointed it at the base of a small, bubbling spring that trickled out from beneath a new-looking stone retaining wall. And there it was, a faint but unmistakable ghostly green glow. The water under my land was surfacing right here, in her backyard. She hadn't just built a wall, she had built a dam. My die had just painted a glowing green arrow pointing directly at her crime. I stood up, a slow smile spreading across my face. The board was set, the pieces were in place, and tomorrow, at her big victory party, I was going to checkmate the queen. And tomorrow, at her big victory party, I was going to checkmate the queen. The meeting was less of a meeting and more of a public execution, my execution. Karen had set up a pristine white tent on her lawn, right beside the infamous rose garden. She had catered snacks. About 30 people were there, a mix of curious neighbors and her own supporters. The developer, a man with a slick suit and an even slicker smile, stood beside her like a prize. Karen began her presentation, her voice smooth and confident. She spoke of progress, of enhancing community value. She pointed to the old 1972 map, projected onto a large screen. "As you can see," she said, gesturing toward my property on the map, "we have several lots, like Mr. Maxwell's, that are legally compromised and, frankly, geologically unstable. They pose a risk to us all." The developer then took the stage, talking about his vision for luxury lakeside living. He mentioned his offer to buy the problematic lots at a fair market price, a price I knew would be pennies on the dollar. The crowd murmured, a mix of greed and apprehension. It was all going exactly according to her plan. I let them finish. I waited until the developer asked for questions. Then I walked forward. The crowd parted for me like I was Moses, but not in a good way. The whispers followed me. "What's he doing? He has some nerve." I ignored them. I walked right up to the front, standing a few feet from Karen. "I have a question," I said, my voice calm and clear. It carried across the lawn. "But it's not for the developer. It's for you, Karen." She stiffened, her smile faltering for just a second. "Leo, this isn't the time or place for your grievances." "Oh, I think it's the perfect place," I said, turning to the crowd. "Karen is right about one thing. There is a geological instability in this neighborhood, but it has nothing to do with that old map." I walked over to her prize-winning rose bushes. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. "She's been complaining for months about this swamp ruining her roses, hasn't she?" I looked at Frank, who gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "The real problem," I announced, "isn't a gate, it's water." I knelt down, just as I had the night before. But this time, I wasn't alone. I pulled out the blacklight flashlight. It looked like a toy. People were confused. Karen let out an exasperated sigh. "What is this, a magic show?" she scoffed. "Something like that," I replied. I clicked on the light. A powerful beam of violet light cut through the twilight. I pointed it at the little spring bubbling up from under her new retaining wall. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The water glowed. It was no longer faint. It was a brilliant, eerie, undeniable green. It looked like something radioactive was leaking from the earth right in the middle of her perfect garden. "What you're seeing," I said, my voice ringing with authority, "is tracer dye that I introduced into the groundwater on my property half a mile away 2 days ago." I stood up and faced the stunned crowd. The landscaping work done on this property and on Mr. Henderson's wasn't just cosmetic. It was engineered. You built retaining walls that intersected a natural underground spring. You dammed it. You didn't just block my driveway, Karen. You blocked a waterway. And water, I said, locking eyes with her, my voice dropping to a low, intense growl, always finds a way out. Just then, Arthur, the old surveyor, stepped forward from the back of the crowd. "He's right," Arthur boomed, his voice like gravel. "I've reviewed the hydrology. Altering a natural waterway without a permit from the Department of Environmental Protection is a felony. The fines aren't $500 a day. They're in the tens of thousands, and it can include jail time." The developer's face went pale. The slick smile vanished. He looked at Karen, then at the glowing green water, and without a word, he turned and walked quickly to his car. The deal was dead. Panic flashed in Henderson's eyes. He started babbling, pointing at Karen. "It was her idea! All her idea! I told her it was risky!" The game was over. Karen stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. The crowd was no longer looking at me like I was the monster. They were looking at her. In the end, there was no lawsuit, no big court victory. The Homeowners Association was placed under investigation. Karen and Henderson faced massive state fines and were forced to pay for the geological remediation. They sold their houses at a loss and were gone within 6 months. The board was dissolved and reformed with new members, people who actually cared about the community. They offered me a seat on the new board, even the presidency. I turned them down. I had won, but I hadn't forgotten the silence in the diner, the looks from my neighbors. The trust that had been broken couldn't be so easily rebuilt. That was the price. I took down the orange notice from my gate, but I left the 2 small holes from the staples, a reminder. On the day of the new board's first meeting, I walked to my gate and hung my old brass compass on one of the posts, letting it swing freely in the wind. It wasn't a symbol of a battle won. It was a statement, a quiet promise to myself and to the land, to always trust the ground beneath my feet, because it holds the only truths that matter.